Morning all. I'd like to have a look at an interesting historical game this morning, played between Tigran Petrosian. We've recently had a fantastic sacrifices video, an amazing player in his own right, and against the legend James Fischer playing black. This was early in Fischer's career, so Petrosian was at his peak strength around this time, 1959. He played d4 and Fischer played knight f6. After c4 we see Fischer playing for the Nimzo-Indian defence. Petrosian invites a Nimzo-Indian, knight c3, laying the pin, and plays the Rubinstein variation e3. A solid and reliable system. Now here, slightly surprising, the move d5. So it can, let's put on a kibitzer, it can go into potentially Rogozin territory, which is a kind of hybrid between the Nimzo-Indian and the Queen's Gambit declined. Usually players with black castle here, or c5, or b6, these are very popular. d5, fourth kind of choice, popularity wise. Now, we see the move a3, and black most certainly, usually, on my book, 157 games, captures on c3 here. 67 games with bishop e7. This game saw a very experimental looking move, bishop d6. I believe the idea is a slight provocation here, because it looks intuitively that white will gain space with tempo. But I think the idea of closing up the position here and later black, for example, playing for e5 like this, where there wouldn't be a c takes d5 mechanism. I think that's the basis of it, trying to encourage white to lock the game with c5. Interestingly, okay, the engine suggests c5 immediately. Petrosian actually, in this position, played knight f3, so not indicating if he's going to play c5 just yet. Now black castled, and we see the move c5 here. So will this space gain be beneficial for white? This is a key question here, and you see this kind of provocation quite a lot in games where it seems a bit ludicrous to allow a tempo gain, with space gain. But for black to play e5 later, I think that's one of the goals here, to try and liberate the position. At the moment, it's impossible. There's knights covering it. So we see the move b4. Now this structure, you might think, could be attacked with b6 or a5 at any time. a5 right now could, I think, be answerable with bishop b2. Let's just check this here. Bishop b2, yes, is a reasonable move, just protecting the rook like this. So the AB mechanism won't be that damaging here. This position will be quite nice for white, with potential infiltration on the queen side. So Fischer actually plays, in this position, after b4, he plays actually knight e4, just before bishop comes to d3 to really control that e4 square. He doesn't mind here the doubled pawns. If white takes here, takes knight d2, this should be okay for white, this position. This is quite pleasant for white as well, actually. After queen b3, this looks very reasonable for white, this continuation. But Petrosian preferred actually to just play bishop b2. It's another good choice. And the bishop potentially is going to help control that e5 square. Now we see knight d7. And now bishop d3, and I think this is Petrosian's idea. He wants black to commit to playing f5. Once f5 is played, the e5 square is weakened. If black played knight takes c3 to avoid a structural concession like f5, this position seems as though white's got good control over e5, with queen c2 creating some other weaknesses, and it should be quite pleasant for white here. Actually, it looks as though there's nothing for white really to fear, and he could get on with his queenside attack later. So a much more aggressive idea is employed by Fischer to play f5. So it's almost like a Dutch stone wall defence by transposition. Once we see c6, it will be like a Dutch stone wall, where the bishops haven't been exchanged off, and that usually means that's usually good news if these bishops haven't been exchanged off, if it is like a Dutch stone wall. But here we see a move by Petrosian, knight e2, so targeting that e5 control to spell out that e5 is not on the cards for black. But also now knight f4 is emerging as something to deal with, hitting that e6 pawn. So black needs to prepare against knight f4 as well. So he played actually bishop f6. Okay, so I think knight f4 here is not that effective. There's queen e8, and then maybe that could even be a tempo gain target with g5 later. So Petrosian actually castles here. He's maintained a good control, good lock and key on that e5 break at the moment. We see now with queen e7 that black might actually be more considering e5 in the future. It might not be technically possible here, but Petrosian's move locks down on it totally in any case by playing knight e5. It's an interesting decision, so he doesn't mind the double pawns here. That would be an advanced pawn on e5. It is actually taken, but before we go into that, let's see if we consider queen c2, for example. e5, was that actually possible? Well, d takes would have been okay, but actually there seems to be a strong tactical move in this position, which means that maybe knight e5 wasn't obligatory from Tigran. Can you spot what white could play here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Apparently it gives quite a large advantage to white. Okay, c6. Apparently this is very strong. If takes, queen takes. Yeah, we're on the rook. We're on d5. So yeah, it seems as though maybe knight e5 wasn't strictly necessary. A move like queen c2 without worrying about e5 there. But yeah, knight e5 was played. Still, it's a solid space advantage for white, and Fischer does commit to taking on e5 after takes, bishop g5. Okay, so can black arrange an attack? His rooks are not yet connected. We see now bishop d4. This is interesting, centralizing the bishop, because also, you know, there might be a c6 either with a bishop c5 implication later, or just targeting a7. So the bishop is a nice blockade on the d pawn as well, and helping keep solid as well, e3. So that means f3 becomes possible to evict the knight. So it's a multi-purpose move, both defensive, solidity on e3, attacking as well. We see now bishop h6, and now in fact the feature provided by bishop d4 is used, that e3 protection with f3 to kick this knight, knight g5. And now the offensive feature of the bishop on d4 is made use of with c6. So if takes, there's an immediate skewer. Let's have a look at that just to make sure. Takes, bishop c5. Yes, there's no real compensation for black here. This is pretty good. In fact, even stronger than taking the rook might be knight d4, but it's very unpleasant, to say the least, for black. So Fischer has to control that b6 square, it seems. Although, you know, technically, yeah, rook e8 might not be blasted off the board immediately either, just preparing against bishop c5. It's a pleasant position for white. That could be considered as well, or getting the queen out of the way, or rook d8. But Fischer chose b6. Now b6, there's no immediate downside, of course, with bishop c5, but strategically these pawns are not going backwards, and they are actually a pawn chain which could be subject to attack. First, Tigran restrains black's queenside even more with b5, and it looks as though this will be an ideal undermining operation coming up. And probably against this idea, Fischer plays a6, and now we see the move a4. It's interesting here, you might consider why doesn't black block up the position with a5? Fischer actually played a takes, and it would seem intuitively on a takes, isn't it just asking for a queenside infiltration later? Well, if the rooks get exchanged off, another rook could come and use that a file. Let's have a quick look at a5 here. On a5, I think this diagonal is still painful. I think what makes it painful, more painful, is the bishop here. So bishop b2 is actually quite a strong move, I think, in the light of this diagonal and the bishop there. So say rook d8, bishop a3, queen e8. This position seems very pleasant indeed. Bishop c2, for example, just getting out of the way of things, and maybe queen e1 and knight d4 next will put great pressure on black. Yeah, it doesn't look as though black's got much counterplay, because actually this bishop is totally dead as well. The rooks are not connected. So this looks as though black's just being suffocated. If we just run this with a few moves to test the position, we can even play f4 here to lock down on that bishop and the knight. This position here looks strategically dead. If black wants to exchange of bishops, he's still left with this dead bishop on c8. So probably this kind of scenario, it looks like a total nightmare for black from a positional angle. Dead pieces, a huge knight on d4. White can just break later with, I think preparing g4 would be a way to try and break open an attack later against the black king. As an example, well, we can build up on the king side. So I think Fischer's decision here, very committal. He doesn't play a5, so that's the sort of horror which could result. This bishop in particular is suffering from white's space advantage. In fact, Fischer played a takes b5. So after a takes b5, there's a different downside here at being expressed. This a file could be an infiltration file. Rook takes a1. Well, rook b8 doesn't look very cheerful either. Here actually there seems to be a very strong move in queen a4, just with a materialistic intention of munching this rook, which is disconnected from the rest of the pieces. It seems difficult for black indeed to parry this. He'd have to give up a bishop here. This would be the best move. So that's not very pleasant at all. So yeah, the rook is taken off, otherwise it's just going to be a target. Queen takes a1, but it looks as though potential infiltration points are useful here. On the other hand, does black have some counterplay coming in with moves like queen b4? Let's see what happened here. Knight f7. And in fact here, there was no infiltration to a7, so this is instructive, not being too overexcited by the space advantage or the a file. Let's have a quick look at queen a7. Here, it looks as though black might be able to do a naughty trick, actually, to get some counterplay potentially. Knight takes e5 with queen c5. So say bishop d4, bishop takes e3 for example, gets quite a few pawns and black's actually better there. So in this position, bishop takes e3, and the waters have been muddied a bit. Even though white's better, the waters have been muddied. So Tigran Petrosian's move is less invasive but more cautious. He plays queen c3 because really he can get this infiltration, but without allowing these tactics potentially. So he can play for rook a1 at some point soon. Black played now queen h4. There doesn't seem to be a major concrete threat here with queen h4. It's eyeing the bishop. Okay, so and that fifth rank. So white's got to be careful about pins. For example, queen b4 would be horrible. Bishop takes e3. So it's got some influence there, but for the moment it's not doing anything. If white's careful, rook a1. So he's going to get this infiltration with rook a7 to hit c7. As well as the bad bishop on c8, the pawn in front of it is also a miserable target. Now Fischer plays knight g5. What is brewing up here? The thing is, without this bishop, is this attack that convincing? Is white really under threat from knight takes f3 or something? Well, there might be a more subtle resource here in knight e4. That's the thing, as a potential threat. If we look at this just briefly, so rook a7, which wasn't played, knight e4. I think it might provide some trickery, but if white's careful here, white is not going to get mated like this. White doesn't have to get mated or anything. Yes, that would be a total disaster, but white can actually get rid of the counterplay if he wanted to here with knight g3. So even, you know, this variation is very good for white, but Tigran's move is more on the cautious side. He goes to evict that queen on h4 with queen e1, making use of the fact the rook hasn't left base yet, so just before going it's helping to drive away the attacking queen, which goes to h5. From here I don't think such a threat is really that important now. Knight e4 or knight f3, they're not very convincing at all. Rook a7, and it's difficult for black to defend this. You might think here, why didn't Fischer play rook f7? He actually played queen g6. Well, queen g6 is an attacking move, threatening knight takes f3 check. Now, white played king h1, so you might think, well, what about rook f7 here? Queen h5 instead was played, and it looks as though knight takes f3 might actually be significant. It does threaten mate immediately. So let's have a look here. Tigran's response to this wasn't to take this pawn. Caution. If he took the pawn here, knight takes f3 is a little bit on the annoying side, even though technically, although it's threatening mate, queen g3 seems to be adequate here. Knight takes d4. E takes d4. Again, white is doing very well and has coordination actually against g7. So this position would be okay as well. But a different move was played, which actually is seen as much stronger, even, you know, from an engine perspective, of not allowing this knight takes, this cheeky knight takes f3, just f4, locking down the position even more. Now, here, knight f3 looks entirely harmless. Actually, it can just be taken, and there's no support for the queen. The rook can't get in because of that space advantage. The rook can't switch in or anything. And the perpetual check, there's no checks really there. So, given that's the case, after knight e4, now there's no naughty threats or anything with knight g3 here. So white thought it was safe now to play rook takes c7. He did that. Fischer lashes out with g5, and here, well, with c7 gone, b6 is collapsing, the pawn chain is collapsing, but with b6 going, the dark squares also collapse straight after that, because b6 is holding up c5, and if this knight is eliminated, then we get potential for bishop c5, and we see this happening quite quickly now, surprisingly quickly. It looks as though isn't black still threatening g takes? Well, there's e takes, and that's sufficient for a moment, so white takes time to win another pawn. So here now, g takes f4, which wasn't played, wouldn't be that good. E takes f4, and then so what? There's no real concrete thing. Black really hasn't got many attacking pieces here at all. Young Fischer has been embarrassed in this position, and in fact now, with the collapse of that pawn chain, it's the collapse of the dark squares as well. Bishop takes e4, which controls the c5 square, and now white uses that with bishop c5. So not only the pawns are ready to run, but this bishop now has this route in, and it's attacking the rook. So this is fairly hopeless. After rook g8, better than pushing the pawns. Well, I think after rook g8, black Fischer resigned actually here. This was the final move. He resigned with his move. I think he probably felt bishop e7 was fairly convincing. It hits g5 as well and threatens bishop f6. So in this position, if Fischer had played on, if bishop g7, white can just play either bishop takes g5 or even bishop f6 or even b6. But bishop f6, for example, this is very strong. So say takes. There's no attack. Again, this bishop's totally dead. Any g takes here, we just play knight takes. It's very, very solid and safe. Where white in this position, f7 is just totally hopeless. b6, these pawns. Yeah, so it seems this is totally lost after bishop c5. Very convincingly lost. If rook e8, white can still use that e7 square to go to f6. So king g8, white could even take here and play bishop f6 here. It's just a very, very strong position. Black's king is getting attacked. So he takes here. Queen g3 is a forced mate, as well as rook g7 for queen b4. Yeah, so I thought it was an instructive game from a space advantage point of view, how to exploit a space advantage. If we go back, it was a very experimental move. This really hasn't been seen much at all, this bishop d6, but it has a certain logic to it, and it has been used in very modern games, this idea of encouraging white to close the center. But Petrosian really seemed to not give black any tactical opportunities, playing it very safe and solidly and making use of that space advantage very expertly. So I think this is a very good demonstration of how a space advantage can lead to a slow infiltration, whilst at the same time managing the concrete aspects of black's potential counterplay, prophylaxis, and f4, just shutting down any knight takes f3. So, and then just winning the material and exploiting all the squares that have been won for an infiltration for white. So yeah, Fischer resigning here. I hope you got something out of that for how to use a space advantage. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.